Ask the Experts platform is a monthly segment that offers an opportunity for Namibian journalists to engage noted experts in one-on-one discussions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Journalists get to pose questions to experts in various sectors to ensure that they are equipped with the necessary information to better inform their readers, listeners, and viewers. COVID-19 is our common enemy. Together, we can defeat it. Proudly brought to you by the Namibia Media Trust and the DW Academy.
Good morning and welcome to another session of Hashtag Ask the Experts, a platform made possible by the Namibia Media Trust. Now, as usual, we'll be talking about COVID-19 related matters. That's what the platform is for. Now, since the development of vaccines, it has been a well-known and documented fact that developing countries were at a disadvantage in securing or procuring vaccinations. Vaccine nationalism has seen rich countries with less than 20% of the world's population stockpiling at least 60% of the world's vaccine supply, aiming to first exclusively vaccinate about 70% of the population in order to achieve herd immunity. Today, we will be speaking about vaccine apartheid, and our expert joining us this morning is Mr. Ben Nangombe, who is the Executive Director at the Ministry of Health. He should be no stranger to Namibians. And we also joined by our very own Salma Moses, who is our sign language interpreter. Good morning and welcome, sir. Salma, good morning to you too, and to all our participants this morning. If there are any questions on our live stream on Facebook, please do put them in the comment section and we will filter them through to Mr. Nangombe. Mr. Nangombe, without wasting any time this morning, let's get straight into it. We're talking about vaccine apartheid today. Has Namibia experienced vaccination apartheid?
Thank you very much, Nina. I think you gave a very succinct background of what vaccine apartheid actually entails. And I think that understanding is important for us to know where we're coming from and what is it that we mean when we talk about vaccine apartheid. You will recall that in the State of the Nation 2020, our president expressed this concern about vaccine apartheid. And where does it actually stem from? You mentioned that some countries with bigger financial muscles were able to actually buy up and hoard these vaccines to the extent that some countries were then not able to access the products because the manufacturing capacity of the entities that we were manufacturing these vaccines could not keep up with their demand. So to a great extent, countries that had lesser financial muscles were then not able to procure the vaccines in order to vaccinate their populations. Then came the COVAX facility initiative, where resources were to be pooled. COVAX facility would procure these vaccines and distribute them to different countries. But then you will know that joining COVAX, there are two categories of countries. You have countries that would have joined the COVAX facility as self-financing countries, including Namibia, which is now classified as an upper middle income country. Then you have countries that have lesser GDP and so forth, who were then able to secure vaccines because of that status. So for self-financing countries, you had to put the money down in order to procure the vaccines. But at the same time, you now had situations where as much as you have paid the money, the vaccines were still not forthcoming. The supply chains were not open enough, and that led to a challenge. Namibia joined the COVAX facility in August 2020 as a self-financing country. We made our initial payment for the vaccine, and you will recall how long it took us to get our first consignment of the vaccine from the COVAX facility. Had it not been for the donations that we received from China and India, it was going to take us much longer to roll out our vaccination campaign here in Namibia. So yes, to the extent that we were not able to secure the vaccines at the time that we needed them, you can say that Namibia was affected by vaccine apartheid.
Of course, this implies that there's, an elitism nature to, vaccinations and the process of procuring them. Is, the issue of having, strong financial muscles the only issue at hand? Why are we experiencing this? And not just Namibia, but obviously other countries that find themselves in the same economic position as us?
Yes, again, is the ability to pay, isn't it? And the fact that the demand outstripped supply. So those countries that were able to negotiate, to go to the manufacturers and say, we are going to pay you so much money, so give us these vaccines. And also, for countries like Namibia with a smaller population, if you go to a manufacturer and you are saying, I want to buy 1 million doses, and you have another country that is going to the same manufacturer and says, I want to buy 50 million or 100 million doses. It's about money, isn't it? The manufacturer would rather start their manufacturing process and their manufacturing lines when they know that they are going to be manufacturing more for this particular client. So for smaller countries, you end up being really at the tail end of the manufacturing and the manufacturing lines. So for that reason, it's a function of population for countries like Namibia, but it's also a function of availability of money to pay for these vaccines. And you see, it is all about the national interest, isn't it? So countries that are able to buy would rather vaccinate their populations first, avoid hospitalizations and deaths in those countries, and then only then they can look at other countries. So it's a question of national interest, and the countries have done exactly that. That is why we are now seeing that some countries actually ended up having so many doses after having hoarded them that they now don't know what to do with them.
Ms. Nangombe, talk to us about why it took Namibia, longer to procure vaccines such as Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer vaccine.
Yeah, you see, there was a slight complication and complexity when it comes to vaccines like Johnson & Johnson. And that is because for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine specifically, they had this requirement that related to what they call a non-fault compensation agreement, which when it came to Namibia, we had a slight problem signing up to that non-fault compensation agreement. So it took longer for Namibia to negotiate the terms of that and to reach a point where we're comfortable signing up and getting this particular vaccine. So that is one reason why. As far as the Pfizer vaccine is concerned, the Pfizer vaccine is a vaccine that requires what is known as the ultra cold chain. That is, it has to be stored up to -80 degrees Celsius. So in some of our facilities, we did not have the ultra cold chain equipment in the initial stages. So it required of us to put in place those ultra cold chain equipment and then to acquire the vaccine so that we can store it appropriately and also appropriately distribute to the vaccination points around the country. So that is one of the challenges that delayed the arrival of the Pfizer vaccine in the country. But we have since made those arrangements. The Pfizer vaccine is available at vaccination points around the country as required.
Do you mind just elaborating a bit more on this non-fault compensation agreement that Johnson & Johnson had required you to go into. What did it entail, and what about it, made you sort of uncomfortable before you agreed to sign this agreement?
Yeah, it had a number of elements that, for example, what should happen when the vaccine gets in country, what claims may be made against the manufacturer should things go wrong, and things like that. So for us, that was slightly problematic. We had to negotiate these terms. We had to come to a mutual understanding of exactly how Namibia views it. And we are glad that at the end of the day, we were able to reach a consensus as to how Namibia can participate in getting this vaccine rolled out in Namibia. So at the end of the day, I think what is important is that a mutual agreement was reached, and the vaccines did arrive in Namibia, and that it was rolled out in Namibia, and it is being used as we speak.
Let's talk about, the ramifications and consequences of vaccine apartheid.
Nina, you broke up a little bit. I didn't hear your last question. May you want to repeat, please?
No problem. I was saying, let's talk about, the ramifications and consequences that comes with vaccine apartheid.
I think the ramifications for vaccine apartheid are many. And they are many in a sense that it will just mean that where populations are not vaccinated, there's likely to be more hospitalizations and deaths, and the impact that come on public health systems, on hospitals, on the need to spend more money in terms of acquiring equipment, hiring more personnel, and things like that. And then the broader impact on the economies of those countries. So if the COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage countries, it would mean that economies will not recover. So that is the broader socioeconomic impact. But at the end of the day, it's also that, you see, there is this concept that no one is safe until all of us are safe. So unless you make the vaccines available so that they are equitably distributed, so that all the persons that need to be vaccinated are vaccinated, then it will just mean that you are actually shooting yourself in the foot, because you will not be safe unless everybody else is safe. So that is, at the end of the day, the message that we need to take home, that vaccine apartheid doesn't make sense, because the public health systems of all countries need to be strong enough so that we can withstand the impact of the pandemic. So unless we make them available to everyone, it will just mean that none of us are going to be safe.
Mr. Ngombe, some are of the opinion that, vaccine apartheid could be a direct influence leading to more mutations of COVID-19 because of unvaccinated individuals. Do you agree with this?
Yeah, there could be scientific merits to that. I think when you speak to scientists about that, there is that sentiment that where populations are not vaccinated, the virus will be able to mutate. It can lead to new mutations that are possibly more devastating than the earlier ones. So again, that is an impact of vaccine apartheid, isn't it? So let us get everybody vaccinated. Let us make the vaccines available to everyone, so that we prevent all these things, including the possible mutations of the virus, which again, this thing doesn't know any borders. So if it mutates here or it mutates everywhere, it can reach other areas of the world. So vaccine apartheid would be foolhardy in the long run. So it is important that we make the vaccines available equitably and without any segregation whatsoever.
certain countries have joined forces, to procure vaccines together, obviously in an effort to strengthen that financial muscle that we spoke about earlier. Namibia too had such plans in the beginning. Why did it not work out?
I think these are complex processes in terms of national policies and arrangements. We have, for example, negotiated and discussed with our neighboring country, Botswana, to join hands in procuring some of the vaccines. It's an effort that we have pursued. But at the end of the day, when you look at it again, for example, as we engage countries that had capacity to manufacture, for example, or that had the capacity to procure more than we had, we were able to secure doses. You will remember that at some point when we were procuring vaccines from China, we engaged with the Republic of Zimbabwe to deliver the vaccines on our behalf. When we were engaging with other friendly countries, we were able to negotiate on a bilateral basis for vaccines, for example, to be donated to Namibia and to be delivered to Namibia through the channels of those countries or through their other logistical supply chains. So I think it's because the situation was fluid and dynamic. We had to act as quickly as possible and pursue those opportunities where we could secure the vaccines fastest. So we moved in that fashion to be able to secure the vaccines in the quickest possible manner, but that does not discount the fact that mutual cooperation between countries is not important in securing the vaccines or in securing other supplies to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, for that matter.
Just talk us quickly through the procurement process. So from the moment of procurement and then to distribution. Talk us through that process, please, Mr. Nangombe.
Yeah, given the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic moved quickly and we needed to act as swiftly as possible in order to secure the vaccines, the Minister of Health and Social Services approached the Minister of Finance, actually through cabinet approval, to say that the Ministry of Health and Social Services will be allowed to procure the vaccines, not going, for example, through the Central Procurement Board, although the threshold to buy the vaccines was actually higher than what the Public Procurement Act provides for in terms of a public entity such as the Ministry of Health and Social Services to procure. So we, as the Ministry of Health and Social Services, were given that exemption by Cabinet to be able to approach the manufacturers of the vaccines in order to buy these vaccines. So under that arrangement, the Central Medical Stores was able to engage the suppliers of the vaccines, of the various vaccine types that were available on the market to procure them. And that is basically what happened. So it ended up not being that the procurement, regardless of the size and the quantum of the resources that was required, was able to procure without going through the Central Procurement Board. And as we have stated in the past, the expenditure on the vaccines that Namibia has expended to date is more than 300 million Namibia dollars.
How does the ministry decide on which vaccines get selected for Namibians, to receive or make use of? What is the merit based on?
When we compiled our national vaccination strategy, we made a conscious decision to say that we need to have a good representation of vaccines, a good portfolio, a strong portfolio of vaccines in the country, because when we were doing consultations with members of the public and stakeholders, it was indicated that there were preferences that people had for vaccines. Some people preferred the Sinopharm vaccine, some preferred the Sputnik vaccine, some preferred Johnson & Johnson, and others. So in order then to make sure that we are able to cater for the preferences of these people, because remember, vaccination is voluntary. So in order to make sure that we preferred or we catered for the preferences of Namibians, we then moved to say the vaccines that, for example, have had a World Health Organization pre-approval or that were pre-approved by authorities that Namibia associates with, we could bring them on into Namibia to be able to vaccinate people. So the choice of the portfolio of vaccines that we chose to bring into the country was informed really by what Namibians expressed during the preparations that we were making as we were compiling the national vaccination strategy for COVID-19.
You mentioned the Sputnik vaccine there, which had a bit of controversy around it a couple of months ago. What is the status on that now?
We had indicated that the Sputnik vaccine or the administration of the Sputnik vaccine from the date of the notice that was published would be discontinued in Namibia until such time that the Sputnik vaccine would have received WHO pre-approval. So we stand on that position.
Very well. There are also new antiviral COVID-19 drugs on the market now, Mr. Nangombe. Will Namibia be purchasing them?
Well, we have always indicated that the national COVID-19 response and preparedness is informed and is based on the latest scientific information, scientific advice, scientific breakthroughs. And our experts are continuously studying and looking at what these developments are around the world. So whether it is about vaccines, whether it is about drugs, including, for example, drugs for the treatment of COVID-19, the therapeutics, we study the evolving science around COVID-19. So if there are new developments that are coming on board in terms of the treatment of COVID-19, of course, we are going to look at that. Our experts are going to look at that and they will advise accordingly. We will look at the cost-benefit analysis as to whether this is something that will benefit our country, whether it is something that we can actually comfortably afford to bring on board. And those decisions will be taken after careful analysis of the variables on the table.
Mr. Nangombe, would you say that the WHO is in part to blame for this issue of, vaccine apartheid? Or is it the vehicles that they use to deliver these vaccines, such as COVAX? And you explained earlier what their process, how their process of distribution, works.
I think the World Health Organization did the best that they could under the circumstances. They provided approvals for the vaccines as they were submitted to them. So I think it's the complexity of the disease that may have led to the delays that we experienced. But I wouldn't say that the World Health Organization would necessarily have to be blamed for what unfolded. I think the issue was whether the manufacturing capacity was sufficient to cater for the needs of those that needed to be vaccinated around the world. And I think the World Health Organization has played the role of referee in this whole thing, and they have done what they could, including supporting the COVAX facility, supporting the Africa Medical Supply platform, supporting the African Union and other entities. I think this is a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary arrangement where the WHO had to really cater for the competing needs of many people around the world. They may not have, they may have their own shortcomings here and there, but I think to squarely put the blame on their shoulders will be misplaced.
Mr. Ngombe, do you believe that vaccine apartheid is what could be prolonging COVID and not necessarily vaccine hesitancy?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so, because I think at the moment there is basically an oversupply of vaccines currently. I don't think there is a country that can now say they need vaccines and they cannot access them. We are receiving offers, for example, of vaccines from different countries that have so many stocks that are about, for example, to expiring maybe in 2 months, in 3 months, and things like that. And we are saying for Namibia, for example, we have taken a decision that we are only going to accept and bring into country vaccines that are at least 6 months of shelf life. So there are so many vaccines out there available now around the world that I think if all people wanted to get vaccinated today, there will be more than enough doses for people to get vaccinated. So I think as much as vaccine apartheid was visible at the beginning, maybe in the first 6 months, 7 months, after that, it became a non-issue. Because now there is a significant supply of vaccines that are available around the world of different types, whether it is AstraZeneca, whether it is Sinopharm, whether it is Pfizer, whether it's Johnson & Johnson. These vaccines are available in huge quantities. And if all Namibians, for example, went out today and said, we want to get vaccinated in the next 2 weeks, we'll be able to acquire the vaccines to vaccinate everybody 3 times over.
I'm glad that you mentioned the matter of expired vaccinations. That's something I also wanted to talk to you about. We do know that Namibia had that issue a few months ago where they had to get rid of the expired vaccinations. But what measures have since been put in place to ensure that Namibia doesn't experience this again? You mentioned obviously making sure receiving the vaccines that you receive would have a lifespan of more than 6 months. But what other measures have been put in place?
Yeah, you see, the whole question is the vaccines do have a shelf life. And unless the uptake increases so that we use them on a first in, first out basis, it is possible that we can again experience a situation where vaccines have to be discarded. We have the necessary cold chain in place. And as I indicated earlier, we are making sure that the vaccines that we are bringing into country are those that have a longer shelf life. And this is done taking into account the uptake around the country. So the efforts are ongoing to engage the communities, to engage stakeholders such as traditional leaders, religious leaders, elected leaders, and communities to encourage more people to get vaccinated. That is the only way. If we do not use these vaccines up and the expiry date are approaching, we'll find ourselves in a situation where we may have to again dispose of these resources. So again, it is important, and I'm glad that the media is doing their part by sending out this message to members of the public that we are facing a situation where resources could go to waste. I mentioned a figure of $300 million. That is a lot of money in our context. Imagine the supplies and the resources that are required to maintain the cold chain, to maintain the clinical supplies and the usables that are used during the vaccination process. So when you look at the bigger picture, it is that if we do not vaccinate people with the vaccines that we have acquired, it's actually our country that loses out. And how do we lose out? We lose out by way of having spent this money and the resources are not used for the purposes that they were acquired for. We lose out in a sense that we still have people who will be unvaccinated, who may get infected, who may fall ill, who may end up in ICUs, and that again is a cost to the country. So it is an intertwined process. So it is important that we make sure that our people go out and get vaccinated so that we don't have a situation where we have to dispose of these resources which were acquired by expending significant amounts of money from the fiscus.
On that note, Mr. Nangombe, what is your opinion, concerning the future of the COVID-19 virus? Many believe that it's phasing out.
Well, pandemics do evolve, and we are following the epidemiological trajectory of this disease. Our experience at how this is evolving. But again, as we say, a respite of 4 weeks does not spell the end of the pandemic necessarily. That is why it is important for us as a country to continue putting these measures in place. We know that the flu-like illnesses tend to proliferate during the winter season. The winter season is almost upon us. And we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where come May and June, we are seeing a resurgence in cases, we are seeing a resurgence in the number of people getting infected and ending up in hospitals and in ICUs. So a respite of a few weeks does not the end of a pandemic make. So it is important that we must continue until such times that our scientists and our experts can tell us that yes, for this scientific reason, we can say the COVID-19 pandemic is over. Last week, we announced the end of the hepatitis E outbreak in Namibia. It took us almost 2-3 years to reach to that point. So we should not rush to conclusions to say that just because the number of COVID-19 cases have started to decline, just because the number of hospitalizations have started to decline, the COVID-19 pandemic is over. It is by no means over until such time that we know scientifically that there is reason to say the pandemic is over based on the epidemiology and based on the situation on the ground. So for now, it is important that we continue to adhere to the measures that we have put in place so that we protect our country, so that we are able to return our country to normalcy on the basis of scientific evidence.
Mr. Nangombe, on that note, I'd like to thank you for your time and thank you so much for being our expert this morning and joining us on this platform.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Nina. Appreciate it.
That brings us to the end of today's hashtag Ask the Expert sessions, where we were speaking to Mr. Ben Nangombe, who is the Executive Director in the Ministry of Health, and we were talking vaccine apartheid. This episode will be up on our YouTube channel, the NMT YouTube channel, in a few days. If you would like to rewatch it, you're welcome to do it there. But until next time, from myself and the NMT team, it's goodbye.
The Ask the Experts platform is a monthly segment that offers an opportunity for Namibian journalists to engage noted experts in one-on-one discussions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Journalists get to pose questions to experts in various sectors to ensure that they are equipped with the necessary information to better inform their readers, listeners, and viewers. COVID-19 is our common enemy. Together, we can defeat it. Proudly brought to you by the Namibia Media Trust and the DW Academy.